Xenia, let's go.
All right, so back to Queensland. So there's been some property management or tenancy reforms in Queensland coming in 2023 and 2024, from what I know. And there's a lot of little ones that are in place, but the main ones that I want to talk about today is the ones concerning, or first of all, pets in a property. So right now, landlords can actually choose whether to accept a tenant with a pet in the property. Coming to next year and the year after, the new legislation is going to say that you cannot you cannot deny a pet in a property. So that leaves landlords with actually no choice if a tenant does get a pet. So if there's 10 applications, the landlord can choose the one without pets without disclosing why they've chosen that one. However, if the tenant then rings up and says, I've just bought a Labrador or 10, you can't do anything about it. So you can't breach the tenant if they haven't actually disclosed a pet at the beginning of the lease, because the tenant...
Even if they've disclosed it?
If they haven't disclosed it, no, you can't really do anything about it.
Wow.
So usually now, if a pet is if a tenant has a pet, so that pet gets written in the lease. So we usually write down the pet's breed and size and weight and whatever else. Now you can literally just go into the property and the tenant will say, well, you know what, I've got a Labrador. It's not on the lease. And the landlord can't do anything about it under the new legislation. So it's a little bit of power being taken away from investors.
What I was going to ask you though, Xenia, is there's certain properties you've got where the strata doesn't allow pets.
I think the new legislation is going to override the strata as well.
Really?
So
wow.
Yeah, from what I can see, and
Yep,
obviously, I mean, it has to be. I would actually encourage property managers and landlords to actually challenge a lot of these new reforms through QCAT, take it through the Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal and challenge a lot of them and see where we can actually push them, because right now they're just on paper. So right now there's a lot of speculation because they haven't actually been tested. So what happens if somebody says my new pet is a horse? Because I've actually had that application. I've had an application here in South Australia where somebody had an indoor horse, and I'm not kidding.
Indoor horse.
An indoor horse, yeah. So
not
they
a
wanted
pony. How big was it?
No, it was a horse, because they wanted to take the back screen door off and allow the horse to come in and out. It was completely toileted. Apparently it was completely house trained, and it watched TV with them and it slept in the lounge. But there was no back door. They wanted to take the back door off and then reinstall it at the end of the tenancy. So what happens in a situation when they've got a horse, or where they've got 1,000 rabbits, or something that's actually destroying the house? From what I can see right now in the legislation, the landlords can actually put some boundaries in. So they can say, okay, we can't actually terminate your lease or breach you because you have a pet, but these are our boundaries, and the boundaries are that the pet has to be outside, or it has to be fumigated, and there are some laws. You cannot ask for a pet bond though. That's actually against the legislation. So you can't say that you've got to pay an extra bond for the pet, but there are a certain amount of boundaries that you can put in, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I think part of this is because during COVID, a lot of people needed pets for emotional support and things like that. So I think that's probably part of the reason they started making those changes.
Yeah.
Yes, so I guess at the end of the day, it comes down to, you're going to have to be really careful who you choose, but you have to do that anyway, regardless, when you're renting a property.
Yeah. And look, the good news is that 30% of tenants do have pets, so it widens your margin a little bit.
Yeah, it does, and it's just, I think it comes down to having the right property manager and doing your due diligence and making sure, because you don't want someone that's had 3 houses in a row that damaged those houses and bring the pet into your house because they're going to destroy it. So you really got to be meticulous when it comes to vetting them and finding out, what the sort of tenant they are. Because the important part is the tenant, more important than the pet. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So people damage houses more than pets do. So yeah, doing that due diligence on a tenant is a must. So yeah, pets also get screened, George. When we actually do screen tenants, we actually screen pets along with the we actually look at whether that pet has ever caused damage to a property, if they've been in a previous rental.
Yep. So that's a good idea. You need to screen the pet, definitely.
Yeah. So the other new legislation that is coming in concerns the end of a lease. So right now, a landlord can choose not to ring you to a tenant simply because they just want a different tenant. No reason. I just do not like that tenant. I do not like the way they look. I don't like the way they speak to me. So I want a different tenant in my property. Under the new laws that are coming in, a landlord will not be able to do that. They can end there is a range of reasons that are acceptable to end a lease. And they are if you're moving into a property, or if a relative is moving into a property, or if you need to do major repairs, or if you need to sell that property. But just renewing just because you don't like that tenant is no longer going to be permissible under the new laws. And again,
and even if you pretend that you're going to be selling the property, you're not allowed to rent it out again for another 6 months, apparently.
Exactly.
So
That's right.
They've covered all the loopholes as well. But what about putting rents up though? You still put the rent up.
I think under the new legislation, you can increase the rent. There's a certain amount. I think there's a scale that they're looking at. You can put the rents up once a year. With comparables, which you should have. You should always have comparable properties anyway when you're looking at rent increases, just in case the tenant challenges that. So that one is not that much of a big deal. Look, the biggest one for me that I think where the power of the landlord has been taken away is the protection under domestic and family violence. So I run a rent roll currently of about 300 properties. The biggest issue that, where a property does get trashed with doors broken and walls broken is due to domestic and family violence. So it does happen. Unfortunately, we see it happen about once a month. And right now, what we do is, the tenants, first of all, if that happens, they just run. So, I mean, the situation goes a little bit like this. There is a jealous ex-boyfriend, ex-husband, daughter in one case that we've seen, who would come into a property. They feel some kind of entitlement over a relationship or whatever. They smash the house. And we've had that. We've had we've had people coming in with baseball bats, smashing everything. Where the lady actually escaped through a window, and the guy barricaded himself in there with a gun. This was in Salisbury, South Australia. Under the new legislation, you cannot charge a tenant for breaking a lease or any kind of lease break charges if it involves domestic violence. And you also cannot charge either the victim or the perpetrator with any of the damage.
You're kidding. Not even the perpetrator.
No, because of the fact of who is the perpetrator.
Yeah, okay.
Do you know what I mean? Like the legislation is a little bit grey, because how do you know who is a perpetrator, who was the provoker, and who was the perpetrator? Like when it comes to domestic violence, you cannot really name the perpetrator 100%. So because of that, nobody is actually responsible. Even if they are not named on the lease, they're still not responsible. So this is a little bit of a grey area to me, because my immediate question is, then who pays? So I have actually rang up insurance companies. Right now they are paying. They don't know whether they will pay in future. Right now we anything that comes under tenant damage is claimed on landlord's insurance. Mm-hmm. Right, landlord's insurance would then recoup that money from the tenant. If there is an insertion in the Tenancies Act saying that the tenants are no longer responsible, then it's only a matter of time, I think, before insurance companies say, well, we're not going to pay either. And then there's really an expectation of landlords to put their hand in their pocket and pay out that amount, those amounts, which could, it could be thousands. If it is domestic violence and every door is broken and the walls are broken, and I've seen ceilings broken because somebody's trying to break in. They've been locked out of the house because they're violent, and they're breaking in, trying to get through the ceiling, or through the roof, removing roof tiles, all of that kind of thing. I mean, the damage on the houses is extensive in those situations. So that's going to be a big one.
You have to be really careful who you choose, don't you?
Oh, no, you do have to be careful who you choose. I mean, in this case, how do you screen the tenants? Because you can't say to people, so, how many psychos have you ever dated in your life that are trying to kill you right now?
Yeah,
you can't actually screen for that kind of thing. I think my real concern is that it's going to be landlords are going to just generalize and discriminate against people who could be prone to domestic violence, and not, such as single mothers, and not want them in their house. So, I think that legislation is going to have a bit of a pushback on those kind of tenants. Landlords are already pretty judgmental. And there is a lot of stigma associated with certain groups of people. I think the stigma is going to increase if they are expected to actually pay for damages.
Yeah, look, unfortunately, the government is trying to do good, but inadvertently, sometimes they make it worse for people.
They always make it worse. They always make it worse when they try to do stuff like this. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to protect people against domestic violence. But at the end of the day, I mean, who are they pushing the bill to? Because it has to be paid. If properties get damaged, somebody's
doing the opposite, because people with domestic violence aren't going to be able to find a place to live, which is going to make it worse. You know what I mean? And it's a bit like the RBA. I mean, the RBA recently admitted that they were flying blind and didn't know what they were doing, right? Because it takes 3 to 4 months for a rate rise to actually affect the market. And so if they do a rate rise before 3 months, they're just making it up. They don't even know what they're doing. They're flying blind, completely blind. Everyone expects them to go down a little bit more, but now at the moment, it costs in Melbourne and Sydney, it costs over twice the amount of money to own a property than rent it. Yeah. And I've been telling people about rent vesting. Now is the great time to rent vest, because it's this is the sort of market that rent vesting is great. So anyway, let's get back to tenancies. And now, so what do we do, Xena? We've got these changes in Queensland, and a lot of us invest in Queensland.
Yeah. I think the best thing to do is wait till they come in and wait till they become a law. And then I would challenge them. I would not actually accept them on face value at first. I would challenge them through QCAT, and I think once they're challenged, their precedences set out. QCAT might actually say, yes, this applies in this situation, but not this situation. Once they're challenged legally, sometimes different reforms will come into place. So. Like if you look at things like in the UK, right now, there's a lot of properties that are actually left vacant. So investors are actually buying properties and buying them just for capital gains because they can't be bothered dealing with tenants. So, and this is actually the pushback on from landlords. So, you know, if the laws become too hard, and landlords are expected to put their hand in their pocket for every single thing, and tenants are not actually responsible for anything, then, you know, landlords might go, well, you know what, stuff it, I'm going to leave it vacant and just write out the capital gains, and that is my investment strategy, which is perfectly fine. But then the government is going to be left with a problem, and the problem is that the housing, you know, the housing market that they're trying to make fair for tenants is not going to be there, because landlords will always have ultimate control. So it will be interesting to see where this goes. I think it's really unfair to push costs onto the landlord, because I can see that it's not really the tenant's problem. It's not really the tenant's fault if they're a domestic violence victim, but it's certainly not the landlord's fault either.
Yep, exactly. That's right. Interesting.
So
but at the end of the day, we've got to get down to basic principles, and the basic principles are, when it comes to property management, one, you need to get a property manager that knows what they're doing, and more now than ever before. Also, these haven't been passed through yet anyway. They're just thinking about it, aren't they? They're trying to put them through.
Yeah, that's right. They haven't been passed through, so they may change a little bit. I'm just reading the legislation as it stands now, and as I understand it now. And
I think there'll be a lot of big groups that are going to push back and do that. But also, as you were saying, you can challenge it in court, and you've done that on a number of occasions here in South Australia, haven't you? You know, you've got a lot of experience. You go in there and you bat for your landlords to get in there and just
2 to 3 times a week. I've got
that's
one
what I'm
at
saying.
9 a.m. tomorrow morning.
You're like a lawyer, because you go in there and you know this stuff so well.
Well, that's what property managers are. They specialise in law, but one set of law, which is the Residential Tenancies Act.
Yeah, and you're really good at it. And you know what? It's good to see that. But there's a lot of property managers out there who've got no idea about the way the law works, and that's the problem.
And look, you need a property manager that actually knows who their clients are, and their clients, the client of a property manager is actually the landlord. So you've got duty of care to the tenant for sure, but you have a legal fiduciary responsibility to the landlord. So when these changes are when these laws are coming in, and they're threatening your landlords to pay more out of their pocket, you need to challenge them as a property manager.
Absolutely, it's your duty. Now, Kent's got a question. With the Queensland change regarding the end of fixed term, what is required to stop it rolling over at the end of the lease?
Sorry, say that again.
Okay, with the Queensland change regarding the end of the fixed term, what is required to stop it rolling over at the end of the lease?
Rolling over into a periodic tenancy?
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Yep, that's correct.
Okay. So if a new lease is not offered to the tenant, it will roll over into a periodic lease.
Yep, and it is a periodic lease. Because I thought, my understanding,
if you want to stop it from rolling over into a periodic lease, which I would really recommend that you do, is that you have to offer the tenant a new lease agreement to sign.
Yep, and then they have to either get that lease agreement or leave, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Right now.
Periodic lease, I mean, because I know, I thought with periodic lease that it's a month-to-month basis, and each party can leave.
It is.
But the landlord won't be able to get rid of the tenant in Queensland with the new changes. Is that what's happening?
That's a bit of a trickier situation. See, I will tell you what happens now, and then we could sort of discuss what could happen under the new legislation. So right now, if a tenant, if we're coming up to the end of the lease, the tenant is actually given a new lease to sign. If they don't sign it by a certain amount of time, there is a termination notice pinned to that new lease. So it's like, take one or the other. You either leave, or you sign a new lease. Under the new legislation that says you cannot end a lease, I don't know if there is anything stopping a tenant from saying, well, no, I'm not going to sign a new lease, and I'm not leaving either. And it rolls over into a periodic lease, which is month by month. And if it's a periodic lease, then the landlord is pretty much stuffed, because if a tenant defaults on a periodic lease, you pretty much don't have any insurance to cover the rent arrears on.
Okay. So Kent's saying, so it won't automatically roll to periodic if you've offered a new fixed term lease. Look, I'd imagine that's what's going to happen. And I think at the end of the day, so we need to send a notice to leave.
Leave.
Yep. I don't think they'll be able to. I mean, what's the point of offering a lease and having rent go up if everyone goes on periodic? It's going to be. Can you put rent up?
Yeah, that's right.
Lease? Or you can't.
Well, apparently you can put it up once a year, but again,
right.
I mean, but again, they've got to sign a lease. They've got to sign a new lease. So if the tenant's sitting there going, "Nah, you know what, I'm not going to sign a new lease," I'm not sure where. And this is where I say challenge it. You know, you need to actually take it to court and say, we want this tenant to either sign a lease or leave. Where do we stand? You know, challenge every
worst case scenario.
It.
Get your nephew or niece and get them to move in for 3 months.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you can do that, can't you?
Yep. You can. You can.
Yeah. So if you had a tenant out of hell, I'd get my nephew and go, guess what? You're getting a free trip, 6 months. You're getting a free trip to Queensland. Off you go.
Yeah. Exactly.
If they want to play games, I mean, look, hopefully we're going to avoid that. But at the end of the day, you got to think of things around it. You know what I mean? That's the way it is.
Yeah. And I think they're trying it out in Queensland. I think the idea is to roll it out in all the states. So South Australia is sitting there right now going, oh, let's see how it plays out for Queensland. I think it's going to be a bumpy ride for a lot of them. I think, you know, a lot of landlords are not just going to take it. And a lot of property managers, hopefully they have enough sense to not just take it as well, to actually challenge it through and see if there is any precedence for any kind of bizarre situations that are going to crop up, which ultimately I think there will be.
Yep. I mean, look, rentals increase have gone crazy recently. They've gone up quite a bit. And, you know, there's a rental crisis. And I don't think the government's helping this rental crisis. They never do. And it's getting worse because what's happened now, if you look at the immigration figures, we've had the highest immigration this year than over the last 20 years.
Wow.
Right? And there's actually 980,000 people waiting to come into the country, and Labor is trying to fast track them all, like nearly 1 million people. Now, how's that going to affect the rental crisis? What do you see is going to help the rental crisis, Xena? What's happening there?
Well, is it a rental crisis? Who is it a crisis for? It's a crisis for tenants.
Yes,
it's actually
not for landlords.
For landlords, it's not. Look, I think it's a cycle. It's a market cycle. So, you know, markets go up and they go down. You know, they're caused by supply and demand. There is a.
Okay, I've lost you there.
The demand. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep, I can. The thing is, though, is basically there's just not enough houses. Is that correct? Not enough dwellings, not enough place for people to live.
There's not enough dwellings, and from what I can see, apart from the immigration, there's two things causing that, and one of them is an influx of interstate people into South Australia. We're talking about South Australia specifically. So there's been an influx from Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane, specifically because of the COVID situation and the shutdowns in those countries. So there's been an influx of white collar workers into South Australia that are competing for those rental prices. The other one is when this happens historically, when the supply is reduced, then developers get to work, and yes, they actually develop more properties to meet that all of that demand. And then it goes flat.
But the challenge
However,
is there's no land available. Like, because
well, right now
I mean,
there's no building supplies available either.
no building
So
supplies, no
whatever,
land, no nothing. So that's the problem. We can't supply it because,
yeah,
trust me, I look every week for land for our clients because we're desperate to find something, and there's nothing
mm,
available. It's just such a shortage of supply, and building costs have gone up. There's no building materials. There's no land.
yeah,
Builders are going
yeah,
broke. They want no one to build the thing. I found some land. No builder. There's no builder that wanted to build in this certain place that I found.
yeah,
They're just
yeah,
just getting a builder to build land, build properties now is hard because they're all scared.
yeah,
So it's going to be a big challenge because it's interesting because we've got such a tight rental market. These extra 100,000 people, 120,000 people that came here this year is going to make it even tighter, and next year
mm,
again, and keep going. So I think it's going to be very interesting, especially now the market sentiment. I mean, a lot of people have cooled off on the idea of buying a house. If you look at the figures, a lot of people that wanted to buy over the next 6 months have decided not to. Almost up to the point before COVID hit. When COVID hit, everyone decided not the right time to buy. And look what happened. Property price went through the roof. And
mm,
now,
mm.
once again, people are saying the same thing, and I'm wondering what's going to happen there. I mean, I know long-term property always goes up, and it's always interesting to see what is going to happen in the short term, but we know long-term it's going to go up.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Look, I've never seen anything like this with the rental demands being pushed so high. At the beginning, we had no idea what hit us as property managers. We did a normal open inspection, expecting 5 to 6 groups of people to walk through, and 150 people walk through the house, and you think,
Wow.
what is going on? So that almost happened overnight, and it has not let off at all. The demand is still there in South Australia, at least.
Yeah. So yeah, it is fascinating what's happening at the moment because you look at the Australian dollar. The Australian dollar has tanked compared to the US dollar. We're down in the 60s again, and you know, and with the suburbs that are going down in value, it's like Sydney and Melbourne. They're going down in value, and that's because they went so high up. It's the blue chip suburbs that are really taking a hit with these rate rises. And those mid-range properties, the 400 to 500 mark, haven't been touched really that much at all. I see the pricing is still the same, which is interesting. There's talk of
So,
interest rates coming
George,
down.
sorry.
Yeah.
I don't think it's affecting Canberra too much.
Okay.
Property prices going down.
Yep.
We actually set a record the other week for a house that sold for $9 million.
Wow, that's amazing because I mean,
Yep.
Canberra's already overpriced, if you ask me.
In the inner south, the house sold for $9 million.
Wow.
So it's not affecting Canberra and or Queensland at all.
Yeah, interesting. So very resistant. 99% of an average full-time wage is the average mortgage payment. And in Melbourne, it's 70%. And then you've got Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, that's all down from 55 down to 39%. So you can see how much more affordable Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth are compared to Sydney and Melbourne. And I think that's why these three cities especially are going to be growing a lot more. Now, obviously, immigration is going to be pushing more about Sydney and Melbourne because of the unit market and everything else like that. So Charmaine was saying there's talk about interest rates coming back down in 2023. What is the likelihood of this? Interesting, because we all want to know what's going to happen then. They reckon there might be another rate rise of 1.25 because they're going to slow down a bit. They're going to cut it down. That may happen, I think, in November because, Melbourne cuts usually the rate rise that happens or the change that happens. What's going to happen is then once there's been 4 months since the rate hikes, we're going to see what it really did to the economy and what it happens to the people because we don't know what's happening at the moment because it hasn't affected anyone that much yet. When that happens, I know what the RBA is going to do. They're going to do what they normally do and go, oh shit, we overcorrected. let's start slashing. And they're going to just slash like crazy, as they always do. And they're going to go overboard. I really think they should slow down when it comes to putting rates up, and slow down when it comes to putting them down, and actually not use it as such a blunt tool and take their time. But, you know, they're trying to slow down inflation through putting the rates up, but inflation is due to supply chain problems, not to do with interest rates. So they're using the wrong tool for the wrong thing. If you look at service-based businesses in Australia, they haven't changed price at all, not one bit. So you go get a massage, a pedicure, a manicure, anything to do with service that doesn't include a product, hasn't gone up. The only thing that's gone up is product, because of the supply chain and trying to get them in. Which is very different.
That link won't come in. I reckon they've got a
Hello.
new link.
Someone's got their iPhone on. So what's happening in America, which is interesting, is in America, even services have gone up quite a bit as well. They've got real inflation, not just supply chain like we've got. So guys, that's about it. Our shirt finishes in 4 minutes. So if you've got any other questions, or anyone want to say anything, that's great. What did you learn tonight? What's your biggest takeaway? If you want to type it in the chat. Anything else that you want to talk about for the good of humanity or property investing? Anything like that?
George, it's Joda here. It might be a bit of a dumb question. I think I had some tech issues joining, but does the SHERP start at 6 p.m. Adelaide time now, every Thursday? Is that right?
Okay, let me go in the calendar, and I'm going to open it up. 6:00. So there you go.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's been fun.